Get out. I won't have a thief living under my roof. That's what my stepfather said to me on the night of January 14th, 2011. I was 16 years old. Outside, the snow was coming down so hard you couldn't see the mailbox at the end of the driveway. The wind chill was somewhere around -20. I was standing in the front hallway of the only house I'd ever really called home, wearing jeans, a thin hoodie, and the slippers my mother had given me for Christmas 3 weeks earlier. He didn't even let me grab my coat. My name is Margot. I'm 31 now. I run a small bakery in a town about 200 miles from where I grew up, and most days I don't think about that night at all. But every January, when the first real cold snap hits and the windows start to rattle, my body remembers before my brain does. I'll be kneading dough and suddenly my hands will start to shake, and I have to sit down on the floor of the kitchen and breathe until it passes. The thing you have to understand about my stepfather, the man who made me leave that night, is that he wasn't a stranger. He'd been in my life since I was 6 years old. He came to my elementary school plays. He taught me how to ride a bike after my real father died of a heart attack when I was 5. For 10 years, I called him Dad, and I meant it. That's what makes the whole thing harder to explain to people, even now. It wasn't a stranger who threw me out. It was the man who'd packed my lunch for the first day of 7th grade. His name was Russell. He owned a small construction company in our town in upstate New York, and he was, by most measures, a respected man. He went to church on Sundays. He volunteered with the Rotary Club. People in town liked him. My mother adored him. And for a long time, I did too. The trouble started the year my mother got pregnant with my half-brother, when I was 9. Before then, I think Russell genuinely tried with me. He'd take me out for ice cream on Saturdays. He helped me with my math homework. But once my brother was born, something shifted. It was like a door closed somewhere inside him, and I was on the wrong side of it. I don't want to make this sound like a fairy tale where the evil stepfather emerges fully formed. It wasn't like that. It was small things at first. A second helping of dessert that went to my brother and not to me. A birthday card that came 2 days late while my brother got a parade. The way Russell would laugh at things my brother said and stare blankly at things I said, like I was speaking a language he decided not to learn. And my brother, whose name was Brody, learned. Kids always do. He learned that he could push me, slap me, take my things, lie about me, and nothing would happen to him. By the time he was 4, he'd figured out that all he had to do was cry, and Russell would believe whatever story Brody told. By the time he was 7, the stories had teeth. I tried to talk to my mother about it once, when I was 12. We were in the car, driving home from the dentist, and I'd been working up to it for weeks. I told her, carefully, that I felt like Russell didn't love me the same way he loved Brody. I told her about the time Brody had broken her good lamp and blamed me, and Russell had grounded me for a month even though I'd been at a friend's house when it happened. My mother went quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Honey, Russell is the only father you've got. Don't you dare push him away." That was the last time I tried to talk to her about it. By the time I was 15, I had figured out how to disappear. I joined every after-school club I could. I got a part-time job at a coffee shop the summer before my sophomore year. I saved every dollar in a metal lockbox under my bed because I was already planning, in some half-formed way, to leave the second I turned 18. I just had to survive 2 more years. I almost didn't make it. The night it all came apart was a Friday. It was one of those January nights in upstate New York where the cold gets into your bones the second you step outside, and the snow has that hard, glittery quality that means it's too cold to stick to anything properly. There was a winter storm warning on the news. Schools were already announcing they'd be closed Monday. My mother had spent the afternoon making a pot roast, and the whole house smelled like rosemary and onions. Brody was 11 by then. He had this way of walking around the house that always made my skin crawl, like he was casing the place. That night, I came home from work around 6 and found him sitting on my bed. "Get out of my room," I said. He smiled at me. He had a smile like a salesman. "Mom said I could borrow your charger. Then take it and go." He left eventually. I didn't think about it again until 2 hours later when my mother called everyone down to dinner. We were all sitting at the table, the 4 of us, and I noticed right away that something was wrong. Russell wouldn't look at me. My mother kept glancing at him with this nervous, fluttery expression I'd seen before, the one she wore when she was trying to figure out which way the wind was blowing. Brody was staring at his plate, but I could see him biting back a smile. Russell put down his fork. "Margot, where's the necklace?" My mother's mother had died the year before. She'd left my mother a pearl necklace, her grandmother's, the kind of thing that had been in the family since the 1800s. My mother kept it in a velvet box on top of her dresser. She'd told me once that it would be mine someday, and I remember being moved by that, because it was one of the few times she'd said something to me that made me feel like I belonged to her. "What necklace?" I said. Russell stood up. "Don't play dumb. Brody saw you take it." I looked at Brody. He was still staring at his plate, but the corner of his mouth was turning up. "I didn't take anything," I said. What followed was a search of my room. Russell did it while my mother stood in the doorway with her hands pressed to her mouth, and I sat on my bed with my knees pulled up to my chest, watching this man I had once called my father pull every drawer out of my dresser and dump it on the floor. He flipped my mattress. He emptied my backpack. He went through every pocket of every jacket in my closet. He found the necklace and set a sock at the bottom of my hamper. I want you to understand what happened in my head in that moment, because it's the kind of thing you can't really explain to someone who's never been there. I knew with absolute certainty that I hadn't put that necklace there. I knew that Brody had been in my room earlier. I knew, looking at his face across the dinner table, that he had set me up. And I knew, looking at Russell's face, that none of that mattered. The verdict had already been decided. The evidence had been arranged. The trial was over before it had started. I didn't do it, I said anyway. Stupid. Pointless. I said it because there was nothing else to say. Brody was in my room. He must have put it there. Russell laughed. That was the worst part somehow. He actually laughed. "Your brother is 11 years old, he said. "You expect me to believe an 11-year-old framed you?" "Yes," I said. He hit me. It wasn't a punch. It was a backhand, across the face, with his wedding ring catching the corner of my mouth. I tasted blood before I felt the sting. My mother made a small sound, like a bird that had hit a window, and then she didn't say anything else. "Get your things," Russell said. "I want you out of this house tonight." I want to be clear about something, because I think people who haven't lived through this kind of moment imagine it as something dramatic. Something where the victim screams and pleads, and the parents reconsider. It wasn't like that. I didn't say a word. I stood up. I walked to my closet. I took down the cheap gym bag I'd had since middle school, and I started putting things into it, mechanically, like I was packing for a trip I'd been planning for a long time. My mother followed me into the room. She stood in the doorway, wringing her hands. "Honey," she said, "if you just apologize, if you just tell your father you're sorry." I looked at her. I think that was the moment something in me went out, like a pilot light I hadn't even known was still burning. I looked at this woman who had given birth to me, who had held me when I had chicken pox and braided my hair for school pictures, and I understood that she was not going to save me. She had made her choice a long time ago, and she was making it again, right now, in real time. "I didn't take it, Mom," I said. "Just say you're sorry." "I didn't take it." She started crying. She cried while I packed. She cried while I pulled on the only pair of boots I could find, my old ones, the ones with the hole in the left sole. She cried when Russell came to the doorway and told me to hurry up. She did not at any point tell him to stop. When I walked past Brody on my way to the front door, he was sitting on the couch with the TV on. He didn't look at me, but I saw very clearly that he was holding my mother's pearl necklace in his lap, running it through his fingers like a rosary. Russell hadn't taken it back yet. He had handed it to Brody for safekeeping, like a trophy, like a reward. Russell opened the front door. The wind hit me like a wall. "Don't come back," he said. "Don't call. Don't write. As far as I'm concerned, you are not my daughter. I will not have a thief in this family." I stepped out onto the front porch. The door closed behind me. I heard the deadbolt slide into place. It was 7:43 in the evening. I remember because I looked at the digital clock on the dashboard of Russell's truck as I walked past it, down the driveway, into the storm. I want to tell you about the next 3 hours, but the truth is that I don't remember most of it clearly. The cold does something strange to your brain. It slows everything down and speeds everything up at the same time. I remember walking to the end of our long driveway and standing at the road, trying to think where I could go. We lived 12 miles outside of town. My friends mostly lived in town. I had no phone because Russell had confiscated mine the month before for talking back. I had a gym bag with 2 changes of clothes, my lockbox with about $300 in it, and my old boots with the hole. I started walking toward town. The road was already covered in fresh snow. There were no streetlights. The headlights of cars, when they came, would appear suddenly out of the darkness and then sweep past me, throwing me into shadow again. I tried to flag down the first 3 or 4. None of them stopped. I don't blame them. From their angle, I probably just looked like a shape on the side of the road, half buried in snow. After about an hour, I couldn't feel my fingers. After 90 minutes, I couldn't feel my face. I knew in the back of my mind what was happening. I'd grown up in upstate New York. Everyone knows what hypothermia looks like, in theory. You get cold, then you get tired, then you stop being able to think clearly, and then you sit down in the snow and you don't get up. I was about 3 miles from town when I knew I wasn't going to make it. My legs had stopped working properly. I'd already fallen twice, and the second time getting up had felt impossible. I remember thinking, with a strange detachment, that I was going to die in the snow on the side of a road, less than 10 miles from a house where my mother was probably in the kitchen washing dishes. I remember thinking that Brody was going to have my room. That's when the headlights came. It was an old station wagon, the kind nobody drives anymore, and it slowed down and stopped right next to me. The driver's side window rolled down. The woman behind the wheel was maybe 50, with gray hair pulled back in a braid and a face that looked like it had been outside a lot. "Honey," she said, "what in the name of God are you doing out here?" I tried to answer her. I couldn't make my mouth work. I think I just stared at her. She got out of the car. She came around to me and she put her hand on my arm and she said very quietly, "Okay. Okay, sweetie, we're going to get you in the car." Her name was Frances. She was a retired veterinary nurse, and she'd been driving home from her sister's house in the next county over. I have thought about this woman almost every single day for the last 15 years. I have thought about what would have happened to me if she'd left 10 minutes earlier or 10 minutes later. I have thought about how the entire shape of my life turned on the fact that this stranger, on this specific night, decided to drive home a slightly different way than she usually did because the main road had been closed for plowing. She got me into her car. She turned the heat up as high as it would go. She drove me to the emergency room at the regional hospital, and she stayed with me the whole night, even after they admitted me, because she was afraid that if she left, I'd disappear. The doctor who treated me was a woman named Dr. Halpern. I had frostbite on 3 fingers and on my left ear. My core body temperature when they admitted me was 91 degrees Fahrenheit. They told me later that another 40 minutes outside and I would not have survived. Dr. Halpern asked me what had happened. I told her. I don't know why I told her. I'd been planning, in my head, to make up some story about getting in a fight with a friend and storming out. But she sat down on the edge of my bed and asked me, in this very calm voice, how I'd ended up walking on a back road in a blizzard with no coat. And I started crying, and I told her everything. She called Child Protective Services that night. She also called my grandmother. Here's something I haven't mentioned yet. My father, the one who died when I was 5, had a mother. Her name was Vivienne. She lived about an hour away, in a little town called Millbrook, in a farmhouse my grandfather had built before he died. After my father's death, she had tried to stay in my life. She had sent me birthday cards every year. She had called on holidays. But Russell, after he married my mother, had made it clear that he didn't want my grandmother around. He said she stirred up old memories and made my mother sad. And my mother had gone along with it, the way she went along with everything Russell wanted, and slowly the calls had become rarer. And the visits had stopped, and by the time I was 16, I hadn't seen my grandmother in almost 6 years. But Dr. Halpern somehow found her. She got the number from me because I still had it memorized from when I was 10. And she called my grandmother at 2 in the morning, and my grandmother got in her car and drove through a blizzard for an hour, and she walked into my hospital room at 4 in the morning with snow in her hair, and she took one look at me and she said, "Oh, my girl. Oh, my poor girl." She didn't ask me what had happened. She just sat down in the chair next to my bed, and she took my hand and she held it. 3 days later, after I was discharged from the hospital, I went home with her. Not to my mother's house, to my grandmother's. The caseworker from CPS came with us, and over the next 2 weeks, the legal pieces fell into place. My grandmother filed for emergency guardianship. My mother, when she found out, did not contest it. I think that was the part that broke me, more than getting thrown out. My mother had a chance when the social worker came to talk to her, to fight for me, and she didn't. She told a social worker that I was going through a difficult phase and that my grandmother could have me for a while if it would help, like I was a houseplant that needed a different window. I lived with my grandmother for 2.5 years. I finished high school. I worked weekends at a diner in town. My grandmother taught me how to make pie crust from scratch and how to balance a checkbook and how to drive on icy roads. She was 72 when I moved in with her, and she was in better shape than most 50-year-olds I knew. She had this dry, quiet sense of humor, and she never once asked me to talk about what had happened unless I brought it up first. The night before I left for college, she gave me an envelope. Inside was a check for $42,000. "This was your father's college fund," she said. "Your grandfather and I started it when he was born. After he passed, we just kept adding to it. We always meant for it to go to you." I started crying. She let me cry. "I want you to understand something," she said. "Your mother chose her life. She made her choices. You don't owe her anything. Not your forgiveness, not your loyalty, not your time. You owe yourself a future. That's all." I went to college. I studied culinary arts. I got a job at a bakery in Vermont after I graduated, and then I saved for 6 years. And then I opened my own place. My grandmother lived long enough to see it. She came to the opening. She drank a cup of coffee at the counter, and she told me the croissants were better than anything she'd had in Paris in 1962. She died in her sleep 8 months later, peacefully, in the same farmhouse where she'd raised my father. I didn't speak to my mother for 13 years. I'm getting to the part of the story that's hardest to tell, so bear with me. Last spring, I got a letter. It came to the bakery, addressed to me, in handwriting I didn't recognize. The return address was from a hospice in upstate New York. The letter was from a social worker. She said that Russell had stage 4 pancreatic cancer and that he had asked in his final weeks to see me. She said my mother had given her my address. She said she understood if I didn't want to come, but that she'd been asked to pass along the request. I sat with that letter for a week. I didn't tell anyone about it, not even my husband. I just kept it in the drawer of my desk in the office at the back of the bakery, and every morning I'd pull it out and read it again. And every evening I'd put it back. In the end, I went. Not because I forgave him. I want to be very clear about that. I went because I needed to see, with my own eyes, what had happened to him. And I needed to look at my mother, who would be there, and find out what was left between us, if anything. The hospice was a small brick building outside of town. Russell was in a private room on the 2nd floor. He'd lost so much weight I almost didn't recognize him. He was the size of a child in that bed. My mother was sitting in the chair next to him. She had aged about 30 years in the 13 since I'd seen her. Her hair was completely white. She stood up when I came in. She started to cry immediately. She tried to hug me, and I stepped back. "Don't," I said. She stopped. She nodded. She sat back down. Russell was awake, but barely. He looked at me, and I saw him register who I was, and his eyes filled up. "Margot," he said. His voice was a whisper. "Margot, I'm so sorry." I looked at him. I had imagined this moment, on and off, for 13 years. I had imagined screaming at him. I had imagined ignoring him. I had imagined a dozen different speeches, full of righteous fury, that I would deliver to him when I finally had the chance. What I actually said, standing in that hospice room, was, "I know." Because what else was there to say? He was dying. He had spent his life raising a son who had grown up to be a 40-year-old man with 3 DUI convictions and 2 ex-wives who hadn't visited him once since he'd been admitted. He had spent his life turning away from a daughter who would have loved him if he'd let her. He knew. He'd known for a long time. The apology was just the last small thing he had the strength to say. I sat down in the chair on the other side of his bed. I stayed for about 20 minutes. He drifted in and out. I told him about the bakery. I told him about my husband, who was a high school history teacher, and about the dog we'd just adopted from a shelter, a brown mutt with 1 floppy ear. I didn't tell him I forgave him because I didn't. Not exactly. But I told him about my life. I let him know that I had one. That seemed important somehow. Before I left, my mother walked me out to the parking lot. She stood next to my car and she said, "Will you come back? Will you visit me after?" I looked at her for a long time. I thought about my grandmother. I thought about Frances, the woman who had stopped her car. I thought about Dr. Halpern, who had sat on the edge of my hospital bed at 3 in the morning. I thought about all the strangers who had stepped up for me, and about this woman, my mother, who hadn't. "Once a year," I said, "I'll visit you once a year, on my birthday, because that's the day you became my mother, and that's the only day I have left for you." She nodded. She didn't argue. I think she'd been expecting worse. Russell died 9 days later. I didn't go to the funeral. My half-brother Brody called me from somewhere in Florida the day after and left a long, slurring voicemail asking me for money. I deleted it without listening to the whole thing. I keep my promise to my mother. Once a year, on my birthday, I drive up to upstate New York and I have lunch with her at a diner halfway between her house and mine. We talk about the weather. She asks about the bakery. I ask about her health. We don't talk about the past. We don't talk about the past. We don't talk about Russell. We don't talk about the necklace, which I still don't know what happened to. After about 90 minutes, I pay the check, and I drive home. On the drive home, every year I cry. Not from grief exactly. From something more complicated. Grief for the mother I should have had. Grief for the girl I was, walking down that road in the snow. Grief for the version of my life that might have happened if anyone in that house had ever, even once, chosen me. But I don't go back. I don't move closer. I don't extend the lunches. I learned something that night in the storm and in the years that came after that I think a lot of people never learn. Forgiveness is not the same as reconciliation. You can release the weight of what someone did to you without inviting them back into your life. You can wish someone well from a great distance. You can love your mother and still know that she is not safe for you. The bakery is doing well. I have 2 employees now. I'm thinking about opening a second location next year. Sometimes, in the quiet hours before we open, when I'm pulling the first trays of bread out of the oven and the whole place smells like yeast and butter, I think about my grandmother. I think about how she said that night before I left for college that I owed myself a future. I built one. It took 15 years and a lot of help from people who didn't have to give it, but I built one, and every January, when the cold snap comes, I light a candle in the window of the bakery. It's for Frances and for Dr. Halpern and from my grandmother and for every stranger who has ever pulled over for a girl on the side of a road. They are the people who saved me. Not the people whose blood I share, the people who chose to. That's the lesson, I think. The one I wish someone had told me when I was 16 and standing in the snow. Family is not always who you're born to. Sometimes family is who shows up. And the people who don't, no matter what they share with you, no matter what name they call you, no matter how much you wish it were different, those people are not your family. They are a wound you carry. And the bravest thing you can do, sometimes, is stop trying to make the wound into a home. I think about that night on the road more than I'd like to admit. Not the cold itself, but the moment right before Frances's headlights came around the curve, when I'd already decided I wasn't going to make it. I sat down in the snow, and I remember feeling almost peaceful about it. That's the part that scares me even now. How close I came to letting go. How quietly the worst thing in your life can almost happen. For a long time, I tried to make sense of why Russell did what he did. Why my mother stood in the doorway and said nothing. Why, Brody, at 11 years old, had it in him to plant that necklace and watch me walk into a storm. I wanted there to be a reason. I wanted someone to hand me an explanation that made the math work. But the older I get, the more I understand that some people just choose, over and over, to take the easy road instead of the right one. Russell chose the version of his family that didn't require him to discipline his son. My mother chose the marriage that didn't require her to be brave. Brody chose, and keeps choosing, the lie that lets him avoid looking at himself. And every one of those choices had a cost, and every one of those costs eventually came due. Russell died scared and small. My mother lives alone in a house full of pictures of a daughter she didn't fight for. Brody is 40 and broke and still calling people for money. None of that is karma. It's just what happens when you spend your whole life refusing to be honest. The bill comes. What I want anyone listening to take from this is something my grandmother told me in a quiet way the year I lived with her. She said character is not what you do when it costs you nothing. Character is what you do when telling the truth might cost you everything and you tell it anyway. I didn't take that necklace. I said so, in that house with a man twice my size standing over me, and I kept saying so even when saying it cost me my home. I'm proud of that girl. 16-year-old me with a busted lip and a packed gym bag was braver than most of the adults in that house combined. If you're a young person hearing this, and someone in your life is teaching you that love is something you have to earn by lying about who you are, please listen to me. That is not love. Real love does not require you to disappear. And if the people who are supposed to protect you won't, there are other people in this world who will. Frances, Dr. Halpern, my grandmother, they are out there. Sometimes you have to walk a long way through the cold before you find them. But they are out there, and the life you build on the other side of that walk can be more honest, more solid, and more truly yours than anything you would have had if you'd stayed.